leading the revolution of talk radio. Doug Hurd on AM News Talk 1360.
All right, 5 minutes after 4 o'clock, AM News Talk 1360. Back with Cyril Wecht, and we are joined on the telephone, return visit of Vince Bugliosi. His book, Reclaiming History, The Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Mr. Bugliosi, of course, also wrote the best-selling Helter Skelter. The book is published by Norton. And did I hear something about a deal with HBO on this, Vince?
Well, yeah, Tom Hanks and his people are going to do a 10-hour miniseries, Doug, with HBO on the book. And I just heard this morning, I don't have a computer, but I do dictate to a secretary who's not here at the house, but she just let me know over the phone that there's some petition out now among the conspiracy theorists to prevent HBO from showing the 10-hour miniseries. It's a very special book, Doug. I've had bestsellers like Outrage and Helter Skelter, and I never boasted about them. But this is a special book, and it's difficult for me to speak candidly about the book without boasting, because the alternative is even worse. Someone could think it's just another one of the close to 1,000 books on the case, but it's not. The LA Times said that finally someone has put all the pieces together. It's a book for the ages, and the Philadelphia Inquirer said 100 years from now that this is the book that historians are going to look to. So it's the book on the case, and as I say, to not to say things like this, then I get lost in the 1,000 other books that have come out, and it's not. I put 21 years of my life into this. It's got over 10,000 citations, probably the most sourced book, I don't know, but close to the most sourced book in nonfiction history. Anyway, I'm looking forward to talking with Dr. Wecht.
Well, Dr. Wecht is here.
Dr. Wecht, I hope he's still my friend.
Oh, I think he's. Are you still his friend?
Hi, Vince. How are you?
Hi, Doctor. How you doing?
Before I bring the two of you together and I just kind of sit back and referee this, first of all, guys, we do get into it, specifically the single bullet theory. Let's keep it simple, because without the visuals, sometimes the audience can get lost in the arcane aspect of this, or some of the arcane aspect. Did I use the right word, arcane? Is that good?
Yes.
Hey, I'm getting better.
I agree with you, Doug, 100%. Because if you get into all the medical stuff, then the natural counterpart to Dr. Wecht would be Dr. Michael Baden, who feels who has a lot of respect for Dr. Wecht, but he's a fellow pathologist, which of course I'm not.
Right now, but just for the record, you worked 21 years on this book. If I had said to you when you started it was going to take you 21 years, would you have said, I've changed my mind, I'm not going to do it?
Well, I didn't work 21 years full time, but virtually every day I did. In the last 7-8 years, it's been literally 70, 80, 90 hours a week. But throughout the years, I mean, there were times when I spent the same number of hours 17, 18 years ago, but then there were other times that I had to take a departure to do other stuff, but I still put at least 1 or 2 hours into it. When you're writing a book for the ages, and that sounds boastful, but this is a book for the ages, you write what you have to write. And the conspiracy theorists, as I'm talking to you right now, they're writing books, articles, they're looking at some documents from the National Archives, and I got kind of sucked into the abyss, and I couldn't get out, and I started responding to all of them, as I have, because you have to answer all the issues that they raised.
Right.
And finally, my publisher said, Vince, we're going to press. And if he hadn't said that, I wouldn't be with Dr. Wecht right now talking over the radio. I'd still be working around the clock responding to all these incredible issues that they've raised about the case.
All right, now a couple of quick points. The book itself, you don't use a computer?
No, I've written this whole thing in longhand. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's created problems, but I'm 72. I don't know how old Dr. Wecht is, but I wrote the whole thing in longhand, and then I would dictate it, and then she'd type it up and send it back, and then from that point on, it became a book of inserts, yellow page inserts. Some inserts maybe 30 pages, some just one paragraph.
Well, you must have staff helping you with research on this, right?
No, absolutely not.
Wow.
No, 99.9% of the research in this case was done by myself. Again, it's the state of mind, and Dr. Wecht is a perfectionist himself. When you're doing something that you want to be the book of the ages, you do your own research. I did everything over I got a tremendous number of documents from the National Archives, and then I got the original source, on microfilm or microfiche over at the library, and got the original books. I couldn't rely on anyone else doing the research for me. When you're doing a book for the ages, you also do things like this. I knew that this was going to affect the marketability of the book. This is a total of 13 volumes, which we've squeezed into one volume of 1,600 pages with an endnote volume of another 1,125 pages. But the font is smaller, it's higher and wider. I knew it was going to affect the marketability, but Dr. Wecht will tell you that when scholarship is in conflict with marketability, you go the scholarship route. But see, if I had not gone the scholarship route, then Tom Hanks would not have the book that he has to make a 10-hour miniseries on it. So I've gone the scholarship route. It's affected marketability. People joking about the books. You know, like Cindy Adams said, this is not a coffee table book. It is the coffee table. I don't know if you heard of Janet Maslin.
Oh, sure. I know Janet Maslin very well. Sure.
Apparently, a couple weeks ago on CBS Morning News, I'm told she picked up the book with one hand. She had a whole list of books that she was recommending for a summer read, and she was able to pick up the book with one hand, and it was the first book she mentioned for a summer read. But you don't think of stuff like that when you're writing a book for the ages. I took on 2 reporters from Newsweek and pointed out how silly they were in claiming that the Warren Commission tried to suppress the truth, and they were afraid of a Third World War and all that nonsense. And when I was taking them on, writing the words, I knew that they were going to ignore me, you know, and so I gave up Newsweek. Now, they have ignored me. Maybe it's not because of what I did, maybe otherwise, but on the other hand, U.S. News and World Report gave me a full page of Q&A, and then this coming week, or the next week, I think this coming week, I have an entire page in Time Magazine.
All right.
So it depends what your state of mind is. And my state of mind, and I keep referring to Dr. Wecht because I know his work, is scholarship. And he and I have reached a different conclusion. And the main area that I think, and you're right, Doug, you hit it immediately, that we should focus in on, is the single bullet theory.
All right, and I want to break on that. I want to break on that point. We're going to focus on the single bullet theory when we come back, because as Dr. Wecht has said many times on this program, if the single bullet theory is invalid, then you must have a conspiracy, i.e., a conspiracy 2 or more people. When we come back, Vince Bugliosi and Dr. Wecht on AM News Talk 1360. 60 minutes after 4 o'clock on AM News Talk 1360. Back with Vince Bugliosi, Reclaiming History, the Assassination of President John Kennedy, and Cyril Wecht is with us. Mr. Bugliosi, let's start with you. In layman's terms, I want you to explain exactly what the single bullet theory is, and then I'm going to ask Dr. Wecht what problem he has with it. So start with the explanation, sir.
Well, the single bullet theory means that the bullet, which is the second bullet that Oswald fired, but the first bullet that hit the president, it entered his upper right back. And the single bullet theory proposes that that bullet passed on a straight line through soft tissue in Kennedy's body and went on to hit Governor Connolly in the upper right back. So one bullet hit both of them. Now, I agree with Dr. Wecht that if one bullet did not hit both of them, then by definition, you have a second gunman and therefore a conspiracy. Now, why do I say that? Well, I'll tell you why. Oswald had a bolt-action rifle, and he could not have fired 2 bullets in less than 1.66 seconds. And yet we know that both Kennedy and Connolly, from the Zapruder film, were reacting to a severe external stimulus. There's no audio on the film. Were reacting to a severe external stimulus inside of 1.66 seconds, literally within frames of each other. I believe they were hit simultaneously. So therefore, if the bullet that hit Kennedy did not go on to hit Connolly, and Connolly was hit by a separate bullet, that separate bullet could not have been fired by Oswald. It would have had to have been fired by a second gunman, and therefore there had to be a conspiracy. Now, there are many reasons why I believe that the bullet that hit Kennedy went on to hit Connolly. At the trial in London, Dr. Wecht, I'm sure it was innocent on his part, but he put up on the screen for the jury a sketch, and I have a similar sketch in Reclaiming History because it's in all the conspiracy books, placing Governor Connolly directly in front of President Kennedy. And therefore, the conspiracists argue that a bullet coming from the right to the left, passing through soft tissue after it exited President Kennedy's throat, to go on to hit Connolly, would have had to make a right turn in midair and then a left turn to go on to hit Governor Connolly, and Dr. Wecht, I think, said in London that bullets don't even do that in cartoons. Of course, if you start out with an erroneous premise, everything that follows makes a heck of a lot of sense. The only problem is that it is wrong. I think Dr. Wecht has since learned or already knew or whatever. I know he's not the one that prepared this sketch, so it was not his. He was not trying to deceive anyone. But I think Dr. Wecht knows, and I have a photograph in my book, and the Zapruder film shows it. There's no question about it. Connally was not seated directly in front of President Kennedy. He was seated to the president's left front. He was seated on a jump seat a half a foot in. So the orientation of Connally's body vis-a-vis Kennedy's was such that a bullet passing on a straight line through President Kennedy, which Dr. Wecht acknowledged in London during his testimony, passed on a straight line through soft tissue, would have had nowhere else to go but to go on and hit Governor Connally. Now, I don't know what Dr. Wecht is going to say in response to what I've said. I have much more to say, but I want Cyril to get involved.
Cyril, yeah, please do.
Hi, Vince. Cyril here. How you doing?
Yes, hi, Cyril.
First
Okay,
of all,
okay.
congratulations on this. And no matter what I think or any of my colleagues among the Warren Commission critic researchers, you deserve a great deal of credit for the kind of work that you have done. And I am fascinated and delighted and thrilled to hear from someone else, because I thought I was the last person in America that does not use a computer. So you have won me over on that point. The single bullet theory holds, as Mr. Bugliosi, I'm going to call him Vince, and he's going to call me Cyril, has stated. Let me continue it on. After it goes through Connally's chest, it goes in through his wrist and out his wrist and into his left thigh. So we have a bullet that then starts hitting John Kennedy in the back. All right, number one, we have a significant argument, which Vince discusses in his book, as to the location of the wound on the back. Now, here we have a disagreement because the Warren Commission Forensic Pathology Panel, of which I was a member, and with which the other 8 colleagues' opinions I disagreed to a great extent. But on one thing, and there were a few others, but on one thing there was unanimous agreement that there is an 11-degree upward trajectory. Now, as Vince points out, it's quite correct that when you have a body in what we call the anatomic position, lying on the table and so on, it's one thing from what it may be in real life. However, the predicate for that, in order to explain how a shot fired from the 6th floor window coming downward can have an upward angle of 11 degrees, what Vince and the people whom he has spoken to and the research he's done say is that the president was bent over somewhat. If you do that, listeners, and move your head down, yes, indeed, I would agree that can explain. However, as I look at this Zapruder film, and as I have studied it, and as I have talked to people who have studied it and studied and studied it, there is no frame which shows John F. Kennedy bending forward. Now let's move on. The bullet has gone through, and Vince is right. I have stated there is no deviation by deflection from a bone or even a cartilaginous structure in the neck. It goes through approximately 7 inches of soft tissue and emerges, and it's not been deflected in any way. You know what? I'll even, for the sake of the discussion then today, accept what Vince has said about Connally being about 6 inches over to the left, although I don't see that on the film, but let's say, arguendo, that that's true. If you sit there, folks, in your homes, now or later, and one of you be Kennedy and one of you be Connally, fine, you move over 6 inches, the bullet moving downward and leftward and forward, fired from the 6th floor window, even allowing for a 6-inch a discrepancy in the alignment of the two gentlemen, is not going to make its way over to the right posterior axillary area. It's not just the right upper back. It's just behind the right armpit. That's what that fancy language means. I'm taking it from the Warren Commission word, upper axillary, the right axillary area. Okay, it now proceeds downward at an angle of 27 degrees. These are measurements which have been confirmed by everybody. It exits, and you can see this on Kennedy's chest, from below the level of the nipple. Go back to the Zapruder film. Vince is right. They are shot in essence, simultaneously. A bullet that has a trajectory to begin with of over 2,100 feet, and it's now slowed down a couple hundred feet going through the neck, and so on and so forth, but it's still moving very rapidly. So in essence, you have a bullet that is going through these two people simultaneously. If you look at the Zapruder film, and here again, I've looked and I've looked and I've looked, John Connolly holding the white Stetson hat, that hat is clearly, unquestionably above the level of the right nipple. Now, there's no way that that bullet moving downward, emerging from the chest beneath the nipple, can come up, swing around, and hit the back of Connolly's right wrist. Well, yes, Doug, what?
No, I got to finish your point. I want him to respond. I got to take a break. No, finish your point.
All right. Then it emerges from the front of the governor's right wrist and proceeds downward at an angle of about 45 degrees into the thigh. Now, on its way, it has destroyed 4 inches of the governor's right fifth rib, and it has produced a comminuted fracture, which means fragmented fracture of the distal end of the radius, one of the 2 large bones that go down from the elbow to the wrist. Now, some of my colleagues, and Vince hasn't pulled this out of the air, they have dismissed this. Well, these bullets, these bones aren't really so significant. This is a big bone Texan of 6'4". The rib is a substantial bone. 4 inches are destroyed. The radius fans out where it meets the small bones of the wrist. It is a big bone. And to say that those bones were not directly impacted is, of course, I think, just erroneous. And then you have a bullet that emerges. And if you got to stop, I want to come back to its weight and its condition. And I've just discussed the trajectory. I want to talk about its condition, and I want to talk about its weight.
All right, and we're getting a little bit arcane here. People trying to delay.
Well,
I understand. We're doing
I
understand that. But I want to give Mr. Bugliosi a chance to respond. Go ahead, Mr. Bugliosi.
Okay, Dr. Wecht.
If you have any questions for Cyril, go ahead.
Yeah, Dr. Wecht raised several issues, of course, because he's the scholar that he is, and I didn't get all of them down. I was writing fast. On 11% upward through President Kennedy's body, if you carry that to its reductio ad absurdum, that would mean then that the assassin apparently was lying on the pavement on Elm Street shooting upward, and Dr. Wecht knows that did not happen. We're getting into a very sophisticated thing that would take a couple hours to really grasp, but the bullet was always traveling on a downward trajectory through President Kennedy's body. No one disputes that. But what happened is that he was slightly leaning forward, not very much, about 17 degrees. If he had been in an anatomic position, which is straight up and down, the autopsy position, the same bullet that entered in his upper right back would have entered up higher on his body and exited at a lower point. Another way of saying this, and I don't want to get into this because no one in the audience is going to understand it, but the bullet was always going downward because he was slightly forward, about 17 degrees. If you then straightened him out, kept the same bullet path, and straightened him out on the autopsy table, that bullet, like Dr. Wecht said, would be going slightly upward. But that's only because of the anatomic position, and we cannot get any further into that. Now, on Connolly, what Dr. Wecht did not point out, he was turning about 85 degrees to the right. That shows very clearly on the Zapruder film. 85 degrees or 80 degrees to the right.
Do you agree with that, Cyril? 80 to 85 degrees to the right. Let's start with that.
He turned, but when he turned, the bullet had already been through. I don't you understand? Once the shot is fired and the bullet goes through Kennedy, it goes through him.
No, it shows at frame 210 that he's already turned, and we believe the shot was fired at around 210. Now, let's get into something that maybe the people in the audience could understand a little bit more. On cross-examination in London, and Dr. Wecht...
Tell me, this is how we're changing focus on this. Let me take the break now. That way we'll have some time to talk, okay?
Okay.
Vincent Bugliosi, Reclaiming History. Dr. Cyril Wecht is 28 after 4 on AM News Talk 1360. All right, back with Vincent Bugliosi, Reclaiming History, the assassination of President John Kennedy, and my good buddy Cyril. Basically, what Dr. Wecht is saying, for those out there in radio land, what Dr. Wecht is saying is... this one bullet could not have traveled this circumventious route, if you will. Boy, Cyril, am I getting good with those words? The circumventious route, and then come out in the condition that it is in. If I were to, isn't that essentially your argument?
Well, yes. Let me just, if I may, then
sure.
quickly comment on that. The bullet then that emerged after producing 7 wounds in 2 men and doing that circuitous route, or if you prefer, circumventious. We'll have to look up a dictionary. I'm not so sure.
I think I blew that one.
I think Vince and I are not so sure about that word. Okay, that the bullet, which in its pristine condition weighs 161 grains, as it was found beneath the stretcher at Parkland Memorial Hospital by Darrell Tomlinson, a maintenance man trying to get to the men's room, seeing a bullet that everybody in the ER had missed, nurses and doctors, but there it was. So anyway, that bullet, as found, weighed 158.6 grains. 2.4 grains is exactly 1.5% of the original weight. Now, we know that there were fragments were removed, and in fact, Vince has seen these pictures, and I have seen the actual fragments at the National Archives when I went in there in 1972 to examine all the autopsy materials, and we know that Connolly took fragments with him to the grave. We know that, and the widow declined the opportunity, refused to allow the fragments to be removed. I can only tell you, having done out of the 16,000 autopsies that I have done myself, a couple thousand gunshot wounds, suicides, homicides, accidents, and so on, in my opinion, there's no way that you are going to have fragments of a bullet left in at least 2, if not 3, anatomic locations of these 2 men, with fragments which are identified, which are measurable, which are visible to the naked eye, that are going to quantitate to less than 1.5% of the original weight. And then the condition of the bullet. The bullet, despite what my friend and colleague to whom Vince has referred, Dr. Michael Bodden, has said in Vince's book, that the bullet is deformed and so on, and he likens you can't be pristine or non-pristine, it's like pregnancy. Well, with all due respect to Michael, that's not quite the same. You're pregnant or you're not pregnant. You can be pristine, you can be near pristine. This bullet has some deformation only at its base from the impact of the firing mechanism. The nose, the cone, the entire copper jacket of this lead core military type ammunition, 6.5 millimeter, is intact. Now, they did an experiment, and Vince is aware of this experiment at Edgewood Army Arsenal. They shot bullets into cotton wadding. They shot bullets then through goat carcasses to break one rib to simulate the fracture in John Connolly's chest. They shot through human cadavers to simulate the fracture of the radius in John Connolly's wrist. And they could not come up with a bullet that comes even close. That's my favorite slide. Now, Vince in his book refers, I think it's a footnote, that they didn't have the money to spend, the House Select Committee on Assassinations in 77, 78, to do some more testing and so on. My God, you're talking about the federal government. Billions of dollars are like for any one of us, a couple thousand, a couple hundred, or whatever, and so on. One experiment to show that this can be done. I challenged my colleagues in 1978, 79 on the forensic pathology panel, come up with one bullet, not 1%, one bullet, and collectively they had well over 100,000 cases. These are all top-notch experts. One bullet that has done anything like this, 7 wounds in 2 men, broken 2 bones, and emerged near pristine with a weight loss of only 1.5%. I am still waiting in the year 2007 for such a bullet to be produced by any forensic pathologist in the world.
All right, so has this successfully, in your view, been replicated, Mr. Bugliosi, in any way, shape, or form? And are you aware of the test that Dr. Wecht is referring to? Go ahead.
We've wandered away from the single bullet theory trajectory, which is the all-important thing, into the pristine bullet. 2 separate issues. They both deal with the single bullet. We wandered completely away from the trajectory of that bullet passing through soft tissue, and I'm going to return to it, and hopefully we'll have time to deal with the pristine bullet.
Okay.
Dr. Wecht in London referred to the bullet as I recall, a magic bullet. And on my cross-examination, I said to him, now, Dr. Wecht, this bullet, which you concede passed on a straight line through soft tissue in President Kennedy's body, if it did not go on to hit Governor Connolly, as you claim it did not, I said, why did it not tear up the interior of the limousine or hit the driver or anyone else? And his response to me was, Mr. Bugliosi, it's not my responsibility. I did not conduct an investigation. Whereupon I said to him, now, Dr. Wecht, haven't you come up with your own magic bullet? I said, if the bullet did not hit Connolly, as you say it did not tear up the interior of the limousine, did not hit the driver or anyone else, it must have zigzagged to the left. And Cyril said, no, it need not have zigzagged to the left. I said, did it hop, skip, and jump over the car? And he said, no, it did not have to perform any remarkable feat at all. Whereupon I said, well, then, Dr. Wecht, tell this Dallas jury, the trial was in London, it was a Dallas jury, what happened to that bullet after it exited the throat of President Kennedy? He said, I don't know. Now, what that means is that the conspiracy theorists apparently are the ones that have the magic bullet. After it passed on a straight line through President Kennedy's body, it literally, if we're to believe the conspiracy theorists, vanished without a trace into thin air. And they're the ones that have the magic bullet, and yet the conspiracy theorists have wrapped that magic bullet label around the neck of the Warren Commission for close to 44 years. Now, there's another point that goes in the direction of the single bullet theory, and Dr. Wecht knows all about this, but the audience probably will not. The entrance wound to to Governor Connolly's body was ovoid. It was not circular, and entrance wounds are circular. This was ovoid, meaning that it had been hit by some intervening object. It had not started to wobble on its own. At 59 yards, it would not be wobbling or yawing. It doesn't do that at 59 yards. So it was hit by some intervening object. If it was not President Kennedy's body, as the other 8 pathologists on the House Select Committee concluded, then what caused the bullet to start yawing or wobbling after it exited the president's throat? Obviously, it was the president's body. There's another point involved here. A trajectory study done by Thomas Canning, he's a space engineer for NASA. What he did, he plotted the trajectory of this magic bullet, starting from the entrance wound to Connolly's body, to the exit wound in Kennedy's throat, to the entrance wound in Kennedy's body, on a straight line backward to the source, the origin of fire, and lo and behold, where is it? It's at the 6th floor window where we know Oswald was. I mean, his fingerprint and palm print were found there. His Carcano rifle was found there. Now, on the pristine bullet, yes, the HSCA did not conduct a test, but the Warren Commission did, and the HSCA relied on that test. And Dr. Wecht, as you know, the Warren Commission scientists testified that the bullet that they had was very, very close to CE 399, Commission Exhibit 399. They did not say that in no way did it resemble. It did resemble, and there was testimony under penalty of perjury from several scientists that it was close. I forget the exact words. They're in the book, but it was close. The HSCA said to find a bullet that's going to duplicate CE 399, we probably have to fire millions upon millions of bullets, and we don't have the time or the money to do that. But, Doug, there was a attempted reproduction of what happened. It was by the Warren Commission, not by the House Select Committee on Assassination.
Okay, now let me jump back to Dr. Wecht.
All right, first of all,
you guys feel free to just go back and forth. Forget I'm here for a minute, okay?
Yeah,
Guys,
well,
go back and forth.
With regard to where the bullet emerged, I want to make 2 comments. Number one, I wish that we were able to do this on television. So we could show this, that the bullet emerging from Kennedy's neck quite easily, without any magical prestidigitation or aerodynamic feats of bewilderment, would move straight on out. There was no partition blocking the rear compartment from the front. The bullet just goes on out to the left, and not striking the driver, the Secret Service driver. I have no problem with that. Secondly, with regard to the downward trajectory, yes, Elm Street proceeds downward from Houston, and the cars were moving downward, so that there is indeed a downward trajectory. And one more comment on that, of course, and Vince is truly an expert on this. As an outstanding lawyer and prosecutor, it is up to the prosecution to establish something beyond a reasonable doubt. It is not necessary for the defendant, let's make me the defendant here, to come up with something plausible. I can show that I did not murder somebody. It's not for me. This isn't Perry Mason. This isn't Ray Burr playing Perry Mason on television, that I got to show you sitting in the 4th row of the courtroom who the real murderer is. Now, getting back to the experiment, I must disagree with Vince, and I'll show you that slide, and I'm going to make a copy of it. I'm going to send it to Vince. As I said, it is my favorite slide. And I didn't make it. The Warren Commission people, their staff, the Edgewood Army Arsenal Research Team, they put it together. They selected then the bullet that broke only a rib and a goat, and they selected the bullet that broke only a radius in a human cadaver, and to try to prove their case. And I can tell you, I've spoken to, I don't know, by now, 100,000, 200,000 people cumulatively over 40 years, whether it's elementary school, senior school, university, Masons, Elks, women, whatever. I show that slide, and I say, ladies and gentlemen, I am now the prosecutor. Lee Harvey Oswald is on trial. I want to thank you for your patience, for your diligence, for your attentiveness in this 6-week trial, and I want to just recapitulate with you some highlights. And here, ladies and gentlemen, this is the proof. I want you to look at this slide, and I want you to see if a bullet that breaks the rib of a goat can look like this, and you see it's wide and flat, and it almost looks like different caliber ammunition, but it is not. And a bullet that breaks a radius can look like this, and here you see a bullet with a mushrooming, peeling back effect, and so on. Then I go back over to Commission Exhibit 399, the magic bullet, which is at the far left of the screen of that slide, and I say, why cannot a bullet then, which breaks both a rib and a radius, look like this? And I have yet to have an audience that doesn't burst out into laughter.
Now, what is Mr. Bugliosi's response to that?
Doctor, are you saying that there was not testimony under penalty of perjury from the scientists who conducted that experiment, that the bullet that they fired through that goat came out close to 399? Are you saying that?
Vince, I don't care what they said. There's the picture. It's their picture,
yes,
Vince.
And
it's their picture.
It absolutely is similar.
But, Vince, you know, as far as testimony, and my God, here again, and I'm not being the least bit disingenuous,
right.
You are an outstanding veteran and expert. I don't have to talk to you about testimony which can be manipulated, which can be influenced, which can be outright perjurious. I mean, so, that doesn't tell us anything.
Conspiracy here, including the scientists and the 8 other pathologists on the HSCA that did not agree with you. And
they had no answer for that, Vince. They had no answer for that slide.
I'm not saying that because they disagreed with you, 8 of them did, plus the 3 autopsy surgeons, that they're necessarily right and you're wrong. There's an old expression: if 50 million people say a foolish thing, it's still a foolish thing. But Cyril, on the burden of proof, you make a very valid point, because you're not only an extremely outstanding pathologist, one of the greatest in America, but you're also a lawyer. And you know that the people alleging conspiracy here, if we were in a courtroom, they'd have the burden of proof. I wouldn't have to prove the negative. They're claiming that there's a conspiracy, and they've never been able to show one in close to 44 years.
Well, but if you were prosecuting
Cyril, I'd ask you this question. Let me ask you this.
Yes.
What happened to that bullet that you agree passed through soft tissue on a straight line? What happened to it after it exited the president's throat? Can you tell the audience?
Yeah, I believe that bullet just went out over the left side of the car. Now, you made a comment.
But then it had a zigzag then. It had to be a magic bullet.
No. I don't believe it had the zigzag at all, Vince.
Cyril,
I'm sorry we don't have a picture
line.
of that to show right now. If you have the car, the automobile to show, and then, as you know, there's evidence of a bullet striking a curb down there, the tag fragment.
The belief of that is that's the first bullet that missed. But Cyril, the
we don't know
bullet
that
is passing
for sure.
on a straight line through President Kennedy. He's on the right side of the car. How could it go over to the left without zigzagging and become a magic bullet?
Well, that bullet, in my opinion, moving leftward, can indeed go through there. Now, as you know, too, they speak about a hole in the windshield. I'm not a big man on that. I just want to mention that, too, because you do discuss that in your book. And I want to say this. You commented before about a statement that I made when I was just a youngster, and you took advantage of me in London. I was just a snot-nosed kid, for God's sake. And there you were, coming off Manson and so on. But anyway, but what I want to say is this: that in truth, it's not for me. I do not have the capability, nobody in the world, not you or anybody, to go back and do the kind of investigation that you would be the first one, as an experienced DA, to say should have been done. Forgetting for a moment, setting aside what you come to a conclusion about regarding this case, this has been a murder case. As a DA, you would have been horrified. You would have been after some cops' rear ends if the homicide detectives ever handled a case like this on anybody, let alone a president or a senator or a mayor or anybody else.
No,
it was
Cyril,
a botched-up
Cyril,
investigation.
Let
This
me.
would have been a 2-3 day murder trial if the victim had not been Kennedy. Earl Warren said the same thing. He used to be the DA up in Oakland. It's a simple case. It's been transformed into the most complex murder case in world history, and that's one reason why this book is so long. This is a simple case right here. But Cyril, a bullet passing through President Kennedy, who's in the right rear of the car, at only a 21 degree of angulation, could not possibly, Cyril, have exited the left side of the car without zigzagging to the left. It's absolutely impossible. And anyone can look at the Zapruder film or any of the photographs. It would have had to hit the interior of the car. You talk about that chrome thing there. That was a small little dent, and they found the fragments that caused that. They found the fragments that caused that. That's CE567 and CE569.
Well, they found fragments.
But Cyril, I'm talking about the large bullet. The large bullet.
Yes, no, I understand. I understand. You're not talking about fragments. I appreciate that, and I'm
what
saying.
What happened to that bullet?
No, I'm saying
bullet
that bullet could have been moving leftward and could have exited off to the left side
without zigzagging.
Yes, that's
Well,
correct.
I
without
can't see
zigzagging.
that. I mean,
and
I'm
you know
getting
when you
old,
talk about
but,
and then
hold on a second. Cyril is saying you can zigzag, and you're saying
no. I didn't say
no.
No, absolutely not zigzag.
Right.
No zigzagging. I agree with Vince on that. That bullet coming out 7 inches or something. In fact, I want to get back to that on that very point. And Vince talks about the bullet wound on Connolly's back being ovoid. Yes, but he's not quite right when he says that all bullet wounds of entrance are spherical, symmetrical.
I agree with you on that.
It's a bullet coming in with some angularity. We see, in fact, sometimes we can't be sure ab initio in performing an autopsy whether a bullet wound is entrance or exit for that very reason. So you don't have a bullet that is why yawing. In fact, you yourself, Vince, have said that the bullet emerging after 7 inches of soft tissue is not and hasn't been deflected. So why, in just another 30 inches going into Connolly's back, is it all of a sudden going to yaw? I don't believe that it would yaw.
But Cyril, the other 8 pathologists were very aware. The bullet coming in on an angle is going to be slightly ovoid. They're aware of that. But they were also aware that this was substantially ovoid, and all 8 of them concluded it had to have hit, not because of the angularity, which was slight, it had to have hit an intervening object. And the question is, what was that intervening object? And your colleagues, all 8 of them, said it was Kennedy's body.
Well, I disagree, and you're quite right in pointing out that I was a minority person of one on that 9-member panel. As a matter of fact, I just want to say that may well be the epitaph on my gravestone. I mean, I got a few things in mind, and that may indeed be one of them.
I want the audience to understand here. You are in the minority on this in terms of what it is we're talking about.
Well, wait, on the forensic pathology panel.
Yeah.
I'm not in the Vince knows, and he's hoping to swing that over 75% to 80% of the American public.
Oh, well, that doesn't... 75 to 80% of the American public, to use my buddy's line, believe Moses is part of the Red Sea. That doesn't mean...
Well, I'm not so sure. Now you're talking about religion. Now, that's a different story.
And add to that, the fact...
Well, 75% of the American public don't have 1/1000th the knowledge that Cyril Wecht has about this case. So, if they were very knowledgeable, Cyril, and then 75% came to the conclusion, that would have some weight. But they don't know 1/10,000th of what you and I know about it.
Well, but you're talking about 44 years now.
Guys, I got to take a break real quick. Let's also understand something. This happened 44 years ago. You almost have to be 54 to 60 to even remember it. And unfortunately, as far as I'm concerned, the vast majority of American people came into contact with this via Oliver Stone's movie. All right? And that's what they know, that plus a little bit of this and a little bit of that. My opinion. We have to break.
All right, okay.
AM News Talk 1360. We're back with Vince Bugliosi and Cyril Wecht. Vince, can you stay after 5 or do you have to go?
Well, I'm in the middle of a book tour here. I've got another interview coming up. I want to clarify one point on the bullet. It was not identical after the test, and I'm not suggesting it was, but it was similar, and and Dr. Wecht is indicating that it was in no way resembling,
right.
but it was similar, and I believe there was testimony to that effect, and also these scientists said that they were confident after looking at the bullet and after looking at the wounds in the simulated test that one bullet could have caused all the damage that it did and be similar to CE 399. You got to realize this was a fully metal-jacketed, military-type bullet, the exact type of bullet designed to cause a lot of damage to objects it hits without doing too much damage to itself. But Cyril is correct. The bullet was not identical, but it was similar. I mean, there wasn't a vast departure from the way the bullet looked.
Mr. Bugliosi can only spend about 5 more minutes with us. So, Mr. Bugliosi,
if I could make just a couple statements,
please,
and then I'm going to have to leave.
Sure.
And then Dr. Wecht can respond to them.
Sure.
CE 399, that's a so-called magic bullet. Like Dr. Wecht said, it weighs 158.6 grains now. So its original weight was 161 grains. So, like Dr. Wecht said, it lost 2.4 grains. Now, if the 2 fragments removed from Connolly's right wrist and the 4 that were not removed from his body add up to more than 2.4 grains, then we are talking about a 4th bullet and hence a conspiracy, what Dr. Wecht is saying. But the 2 fragments removed from Connolly's right wrist, it turns out they only weighed a total of a half a grain. As far as the 4 that have not been removed from his body, I want to read to you the Warren Commission testimony of Dr. Gregory. I think his first name is Charles, and he was one of Governor Connolly's attending physicians. Spector, that's the assistant attorney, assistant Warren Commission. Will you describe as specifically as you can what these metallic fragments, he's referring to those that were shown by X-ray, are by way of size and shape, sir? Dr. Gregory, I would identify these fragments as varying 0.5 of a millimeter in diameter to approximately 2 millimeters in diameter, and each fragment is no more than a half millimeter in thickness. They would represent, in lay terms, flakes of metal. What would your estimate be as to their weight in total? I would estimate that they would be weighed in micrograms, which is a very small amount of weight. I don't know how to reduce it to ordinary equivalents for you. It is the kind of weighing that requires a micro-adjustable scale, which means that it is something less than the weight of a postage stamp. Now, there's another fragment that was seen by way of X-ray in the left thigh of Governor Connolly, and the testimony there was that was also of postage stamp weight. Now, I know Dr. Wecht has referred to a fragment in the chest of Governor Connolly. I'm unaware of where he has the authority for that. There may be. I do know they did mention, the HSCA mentioned that around the area of the 5th right rib, or after the bullet hit the 5th right rib, some fragments caused holes in Connolly's right lower lung lobe. But they didn't say that the fragments remain there. Okay, now the other point I want to make, and then Dr. Wecht can respond to these points. Assuming that everything that Dr. Wecht said, hypothetically and arguendo, those are legal terms that Dr. Wecht and I use. A second gunman, Dr. Wecht, I think you would agree, we're not talking about some other nut like Lee Harvey Oswald. I mean, nothing in the conspiracy books say that. They're always talking about the military-industrial complex, organized crime, CIA, etc. And here's my point that I would like Dr. Wecht to respond to after I'm going to force to leave. If one of these groups decided to kill the president, I reject it out of hand. It belongs in a Robert Ludlum novel, but in my book, as you know, Dr. Wecht, I describe this in great detail. This is the first book ever to take on all the conspiracy theories. So, but let's assume they were going to do it. Let's kill President Kennedy. Oswald would be one of the last people on the face of this earth whom they would go to. Why? He was a sharpshooter, but he was not an expert. And when you're pulling off a murder like this, you want an expert. He was not an expert shot. He barely made a sharpshooter. He was notoriously unreliable. He only had a $12 mail order rifle, extremely unstable. Here's a guy that defects to the Soviet Union pre-Gorbachev. Even today, who in the world defects to the Soviet Union? Just the type of guy that the CIA or mob or whoever this second gunman, Dr. Wecht, was for the conspiracy in this case, just the type of guy that they would want to rely upon to commit the biggest murder in American history. Final point. Let's assume that they wanted Oswald to do it, and he agreed to do it. Let's see if where that takes us makes any sense. Once Oswald shot Kennedy in Dealey Plaza, and there's no question that he did, in the book I offer, Reclaiming History, I offer 53 separate pieces of evidence pointing towards his guilt. Once he left that building, one of two things would have happened. The least likely thing is that there would have been a car waiting for him to help him escape down to Mexico or wherever. Certainly the conspirators would not want their hitman to be apprehended and interrogated by the authorities. But the most likely thing, by far, Dr. Wecht and Doug, that would have happened, and you both know what I'm going to say, if the CIA or mob was behind Oswald's killing Kennedy, most likely thing, by far, is that that car would have driven Oswald to his death. And yet we know that Oswald was out on the street with $13 in his pocket trying to flag down buses and cabs. That fact alone tells you there's no conspiracy. In fact, the presidential motorcade route that brought the president's car right below Oswald's window wasn't even determined until November 18th, 4 days before the assassination. What rational person can possibly believe that the CIA or mob or whatever one of these groups were would conspire with Oswald to kill Kennedy within just 4 days of the president coming to Dallas? Now, I'm sure, Dr. Wecht, you're going to respond to this. I have to run. Doug, great being on your show.
Pleasure.
I really appreciate it. And, I respect and I have great, he's an honorable man, Dr. Wecht. I like and respect him, and I hope we remain friends after this book. And I'm going to have to go now.
All right, Mr. Bugliosi, we thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks,
Vince Bugliosi,
thanks.
Reclaiming History, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Now, he said a lot there. Let's go back to something very interesting, though, and that's those fragments, all right? Oh, if we only could have gotten those fragments out of Governor Connolly's body.
Let me say this. We, the critic researchers, wanted those fragments badly, but we weren't going to be so callous and insensitive as to have requested them while he lay dying. However, the request was prepared, and when his death was announced, then in a very short period of time, one of the top people in Washington went to then Attorney General Janet Reno with that request. To her credit, she passed it on to the FBI people down there in Dallas, who then went to Mrs. Conley. And amazingly, even though Nellie Conley and Jack Conley, John Conley, during their entire lives, insisted
Right.
that he was struck by a separate bullet. You are aware of that, Doug,
Oh,
right?
sure.
They insisted repeatedly, okay?
We've talked about that.
Okay. She declined. I disagree with Vince on the weight. I don't have to. You can just think for a moment. A postage stamp compared to even a piece of metal. No, I disagree. And the estimate that was given by this one or that one as to the total weight, I think, is quite inaccurate. And in any event, the fragments would have been extremely important because of neutron activation analysis. I don't want to get into too much technical discussion now, but I want you to know this, that a major point, a linchpin, set out by Vincent Gwynne, the Warren Commission, and then later the House Select Committee assassinations expert, about NAA, neutron activation analysis, as being the scientific corroboration of the single bullet theory, has been blown out of the water. You are aware of the paper, are you not, by Professor Spiegelman and others at Texas Christian University, including a former top FBI agent, now Professor Tobin, who have shown upon scientific study. And they don't get into a conspiracy discussion, who killed Oswald, this or that. They just dealt with it as scientists, that everything that Gwynne said is absolutely wrong and incorrect. And then with regard to the metallurgical composition and discussion, Vince relies heavily and completely upon a guy named Kenron and Larry Sturdivant, and he has totally ignored the expertise of two top scientific people at Livermore Lab, Dr. Randy Randich and Eric Grant, and I have a paper which I'm going to leave with you, which again totally show that the scientific evidence with regard to 399 is fallacious. And regrettably, Vince, the Spiegelman paper came out later, and I'm not blaming Vince because it came out after his book, but the Randich Grant stuff was available, and Vince had been invited to review it by my colleagues and friends in California, and he declined to do so. So those are extremely important points. Let me say this, that he laid out for me a beautiful argument. I'm reminded seeing a program once with Bill Buckley, and they were debating, and it came back to him for rebuttal, and he sat there with his hands clasped in front of him, and he says, I'll rest on what I said. Well, I would rest on the portrayal that he made of Oswald. As a matter of fact, it's a perfect portrayal for this patsy. The point is that Oswald was not a shooter. He was a perfect patsy. And with regard to our program here in 2003, a 15-hour DVD set, the absolute most comprehensive presentation, including Senator Arlen Specter and people on the other side, and my colleague Dr. Michael Bodden and so on. Yeah, then it's all there. www.intoevidence.net. www.intoevidence.net. Get those two investigative internet routes of discovery and see for yourselves, and you will know why. Up until now, 75-80% of the American public has not bought into this. And I will tell you right now, Doug, and here's a wager that I'll make with you. As long as you and I live, it's going to remain above the 70% mark, because not everybody can be fooled, as P.T. Barnum said all the time.
Now, on a closing note, you, sir, are a well-educated, intellectual. This man's IQ, if he were to die here in this very studio, would still be higher than mine at my optimum operating procedure. Dr. Wecht is an educated man. I'm Bricktown High, class of 64.
No, you're not going to get away with that stuff, buddy. I
am a mere humble servant
of
Dr. Wecht.
Don't believe him, folks.
Having said that, I must correct something Dr. Wecht said. Unless you saw the New York mayoral debate of 1965, you must have read Buckley's final statement, because that was the debate in 1965.
Really?
Buckley, I saw the show. Buckley,
right? What did he say?
The great line. Yeah. I've got to give this to you. Buckley, Lindsay, and Beam, and they go to Buckley. The guy's name was Vic Roby, and he says, Mr. Buckley, we have 90 seconds left. What would you like to add? And Mr. Buckley, after flicking his tongue, said, I would rather reflect on the brilliance of my previous statements and past. Thank you. I love you, Ben.
Doug, I love you.
You're
Thank
the
you,
best.
buddy.
AM News Talk 1360. That's a true story.